The summer sun beat down on the stately Victorian home in Detroit's historic Brush Park neighborhood. From the outside, the Coleman residence was a testament to the family's success and their commitment to preserving the city's rich architectural heritage. But behind its carefully restored facade and wraparound porch, a storm was brewing, one that would shatter the illusion of perfection and leave a trail of destruction in its wake. Latoya Coleman stood on the porch, sipping a glass of sweet tea as she gazed out at the bustling street below. At 38, she was the epitome of a successful black woman in Detroit. Brilliant, beautiful, and deeply involved in the community. As the head of a non-profit focused on urban renewal, she had become a prominent figure in the city's ongoing revitalization efforts, or so everyone thought. Her husband, Terren, sat in his home office, his brow furrowed as he stared at the computer screen before him. At 42, he was a respected figure in Detroit's burgeoning tech scene, known for his innovative ideas and his commitment to bringing more people of color into the industry. But lately, the pressure to maintain their lifestyle and his company's growth had been mounting, and he'd found himself turning to questionable methods to stay afloat. As the sun began to set over the Detroit skyline, casting long shadows across the city, neither Latoya nor Terren realized that their carefully constructed world was about to come crashing down around them. In their pursuit of success and excitement, they had woven a tangled web of deceit that was about to ensnare them all. Little did they know, the seeds of their destruction had already been sown, and the countdown to chaos had begun. It had started innocently enough, or so Latoya and Terren had convinced themselves. After 12 years of marriage, they'd found themselves growing restless, craving the excitement and passion of their early days together. That's when they'd stumbled upon the idea of an open marriage, a way to explore new experiences while maintaining their commitment to each other and their family. Their first forays into this new lifestyle had been exhilarating. They'd set ground rules, promised complete honesty, and reveled in the renewed spark it had brought to their relationship. Latoya found herself drawn to Deshawn, a charismatic community organizer she'd met through her non-profit work. Terren, meanwhile, had become involved with Ebony, a young software developer at his company. For a while, it seemed perfect. They'd attend events at the Charles H. Wright Museum of African American History together, then part ways for their respective rendezvous. They'd reconvene later, sharing stories over late-night meals at Flood's Bar and Grill, their favorite spot in the city. But as the months wore on, cracks began to appear in their seemingly perfect arrangement. Latoya found herself spending more and more time with Deshawn, not just physically, but emotionally. She'd catch herself daydreaming about him during board meetings or comparing Terren unfavorably to him in her mind. Terren, for his part, had begun to feel a growing unease about his relationship with Ebony. What had started as a fun distraction had taken on a more serious tone. Ebony had begun hinting at wanting more time, more commitment, more of Terren himself. As summer turned to fall, the Colemans found themselves navigating increasingly treacherous waters. Their once open communication had given way to half-truths and omissions. The trust that had been the foundation of their marriage and their open arrangement was slowly eroding. One crisp October evening, as they strolled hand in hand through Belle Isle Park, Latoya finally broached the subject. "Terren," she began, her voice hesitant, "do you ever think that maybe this arrangement isn't working anymore?" Terren felt a mix of relief and anxiety at her words. He'd been thinking the same thing, but hadn't known how to bring it up. "I've been feeling that way too," he admitted, "but I'm not sure how to go back." or if we even can. As they stood there, the Detroit River flowing steadily beside them, neither of them could have predicted the cascade of events their decision would set in motion. For the web they had woven was far more tangled than they realized, and untangling it would come at a cost neither of them was prepared to pay. As autumn deepened, so did the complications in the Colemans' lives. Latoya found herself increasingly torn between her growing feelings for Deshawn and her commitment to Terrence and their family. She threw herself into her work, spearheading a major project to revitalize several blocks in the North End neighborhood. But even as she poured her energy into community meetings and fundraising events, her mind was often elsewhere. Terrence, meanwhile, was facing a crisis of his own. His tech company, once the darling of Detroit's startup scene, was struggling. The innovative app they developed, meant to connect Detroit residents with local services and businesses, wasn't gaining traction as quickly as investors had hoped. To make matters worse, Ebony had become increasingly unstable, threatening to reveal their affair to Latoya if Terrence didn't leave his wife. One chilly November morning, as Latoya prepared for a crucial presentation to potential donors at the Detroit Institute of Arts, she received a text from Deshawn. "We need to talk. It's important. Meet me at the Heidelberg Project at 2 p.m. Latoya's heart raced as she read the message. She knew she should be focusing on her presentation, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something significant was about to happen. As soon as her meeting ended, she made her way to the iconic outdoor art installation, her mind swirling with possibilities. Deshawn was waiting for her, his tall frame silhouetted against one of the colorfully painted houses that made up the project. As Latoya approached, she could see the tension in his shoulders, the worry in his eyes. "What's going on, Deshawn?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. He took a deep breath before responding. "Latoya, I can't do this anymore. The sneaking around, the lying, it's not who I am. And I think I'm in love with you." Latoya felt as if the ground had dropped out from beneath her feet. She'd known her feelings for Deshawn were strong, but hearing him say those words made everything suddenly, terrifyingly real. "Deshawn, she began, but was cut off by the shrill ring of her phone. It was Terrence. With shaking hands, she answered. "Latoya, where are you?" Terrence's voice was tight with panic. "You need to come home right now. It's Ebony. She's here, and she's threatening to go to the press about everything." As Latoya rushed home, her mind reeling from Deshawn's confession and the impending confrontation with Ebony, she couldn't help but feel that her carefully constructed world was about to come crashing down around her. Little did she know, the worst was yet to come. Latoya arrived home to find chaos. Ebony was in their living room, her eyes wild with anger and hurt. Terrence stood by the fireplace, his face a mask of guilt and fear. As soon as Latoya walked in, Ebony turned on her. "So you're the wife," she spat. "Did you know your husband's been sleeping with me for months? Or were you too busy with your own little affair to notice?" Latoya felt as if she'd been slapped. She looked at Terrence, searching for denial, explanation, anything. But he just stood there, silent and defeated. "Ebony, please." Terrence finally spoke. "We agreed this was just casual. You knew I was married." "Casual?" Ebony laughed bitterly. "Is that what you told yourself? Well, guess what? It wasn't casual for me. And now everyone's going to know what kind of man you really are." As the confrontation escalated, none of them noticed the figure watching from outside. Deshawn, worried about Latoya after their conversation at the Heidelberg Project, had followed her home. Now, he stood in the shadows, witnessing the unraveling of the Coleman's carefully constructed lie. Inside, the situation was spiraling out of control. Ebony, consumed by rage and heartbreak, had picked up a heavy crystal vase from the coffee table. "You think you can just use people and throw them away?" she screamed, hurling the vase at Terrence. What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. Terrence ducked, the vase missing him by inches, but its trajectory carried it straight toward Latoya. There was a sickening thud, and Latoya crumpled to the ground, blood streaming from a gash on her forehead. "Latoya!" Terrence cried, rushing to his wife's side. Ebony stood frozen, horror replacing anger on her face as she realized what she'd done. Deshawn, seeing Latoya fall, burst through the front door. "What have you done?" he yelled, kneeling beside Latoya's still form. As Terrence called for an ambulance, the room fell into a stunned silence. The web of lies and deceit they had all woven had led to this moment of violence and regret. Little did they know this was only the beginning of their troubles. For as the ambulance sirens wailed in the distance, another player was about to enter the scene. Detective Andre Jackson, a man known for his tenacity in uncovering the truth, no matter how deeply buried. Detective Andre Jackson stood in the Coleman's living room, his keen eyes taking in every detail of the crime scene. The shattered vase, the blood-stained carpet, the palpable tension in the air. It all pointed to a story far more complex than a simple domestic dispute. "So, let me get this straight," he said, his deep voice calm but authoritative. "Mrs. Coleman came home to find Mr. Coleman and Ms. Davis arguing. Things got heated, and Ms. Davis threw a vase, accidentally hitting Mrs. Coleman. Is that about right?" Terrence and Ebony nodded mutely, while Deshawn, who had been questioned separately, stood off to the side, his face a mask of worry. Detective Jackson's instincts, honed by years on the Detroit police force, told him there was more to the story. The presence of Deshawn, the palpable tension between all parties, the conflicting statements, it all added up to a tangled web of relationships and secrets. "I think," he said slowly, "that you all better come down to the station. We have a lot more to discuss." As they drove through the nighttime streets of Detroit, the city lights reflecting off the Detroit River, Detective Jackson couldn't shake the feeling that this case would uncover depths of deception that would shake the very foundations of the community. At the station, he separated the four individuals, intent on getting to the truth. Hours of questioning revealed a story of open marriages gone wrong, of jealousy, betrayal, and desperation. But it was when he delved into Terrence's financial records that things took an even darker turn. Inconsistencies in his company's books hinted at embezzlement, possibly to cover gambling debts. The tech startup that had been hailed as a beacon of hope for Detroit's revitalization was built on a foundation of fraud. As dawn broke over the city, casting long shadows across the Detroit skyline, Detective Jackson sat at his desk, piecing together the complex puzzle before him. A prominent couple's open marriage arrangement, spiraling out of control, leading to assault. A respected businessman's financial crimes threatening to unravel. And at the center of it all, four individuals whose lives had become hopelessly entangled. He knew that unraveling this web would have far-reaching consequences, not just for the Colemans and their lovers, but for the entire community that had placed its hopes in their success. As he prepared to make his first arrests, Detective Jackson couldn't help but reflect on the irony. The Colemans, in their pursuit of excitement and fulfillment, had instead sown the seeds of their own destruction. Their story would serve as a cautionary tale, a reminder that even the most carefully constructed facades can crumble when built on a foundation of lies. The sun rose over Detroit, a new day dawning. But for Latoya, Terrence, Deshawn, and Ebony, it marked the beginning of a long and painful reckoning with the consequences of their actions. Months later, the dust had begun to settle on the Coleman scandal. Terrence had pleaded guilty to embezzlement charges and was serving time in a federal prison. His once promising tech company had collapsed, leaving investors reeling and employees jobless. Latoya, after recovering from her injuries, had stepped down from her position at the nonprofit. The organization she had built from the ground up, meant to be a catalyst for positive change in Detroit, was now tainted by association. She spent her days in therapy, trying to rebuild her sense of self and purpose. Ebony, charged with assault, had taken a plea deal. She was serving community service and undergoing mandatory counseling, her promising career in tech derailed by a moment of uncontrolled anger. Deshawn, though not criminally charged, found his reputation in the community organizing world severely damaged. He had left Detroit, seeking a fresh start in another city. Detective Andre Jackson, hailed for his thorough investigation, had been promoted. But the Coleman case had left its mark on him, a reminder of the complexities of human nature and the often blurry line between right and wrong. As for Detroit itself, the city that had pinned so many of its hopes on the Colemans and their ventures, it too was in a process of reckoning and healing. The scandal had exposed deep-seated issues of corruption and inequality that had long simmered beneath the surface of the city's revitalization efforts. Yet, even in the wake of such a public and painful fall from grace, there were signs of resilience. New leaders were emerging, determined to learn from the mistakes of the past and build a truly inclusive and transparent future for the city. The Coleman scandal would long be remembered as a cautionary tale, a reminder of the dangers of deception and the importance of integrity. But it also served as a catalyst for change, sparking difficult but necessary conversations about ethics, relationships, and the true meaning of community. As the sun set over the Detroit River, casting a golden glow across the city skyline, there was a sense that while the road ahead might be long and challenging, the spirit of Detroit and its people would endure. For in the end, it is not our mistakes that define us, but how we choose to learn from them and move forward.